Now I'm going to discuss today classical liberalism, which I think, unless I have gotten into the habit of calling it classical liberalism, I'll probably refer to just as liberalism, because that's its proper name. And in France, for instance, it's still our point of view, or my point of view, is still called liberalism. Ultra-liberals, or ultra-liberalism, would be the kind of thing that we talk about here at the Mises Institute. So the French keep to the original meaning. But in English-speaking countries, it's degenerated. And liberalism in America would bring to mind people like Senator Kennedy or Hillary Clinton. I'm not going to be talking about that. The reason I'm not going to be talking about Hillary Clinton is that she's such a strong woman. and frightens me and frightens men. You've heard that she's a strong woman, and that's why a lot of people are against her. I'm going to be using this thing if it works, and yeah, see? Because I'm going to probably be mentioning a number of names that are not that familiar. Hey. Madame de Staël, who has a place in the history of liberalism. She wrote the first liberal history of the French Revolution. She lived into the teens. I think she died in 1819, something like that. One of her lovers was Benjamin Constant. But this is an hour lecture. I don't have time to go through all of them. But she was a strong woman. She was a strong woman. She was, Napoleon was scared of her. So he exiled her out of Paris, and she went to her family mansion outside of Lausanne in Switzerland. Her father was a famous rich banker. And now, liberalism, I guess, to people in America and Britain and Canada, English-speaking people, tends to mean the sort of position that in other countries have very respectable names: democratic socialism or social democracy. What's wrong with calling them that? Except English-speaking people don't like that name socialist. So that even the Socialist Party in Britain was called a Labour Party. Now, I don't know if you're familiar with this famous economist. He was an economist and an Austrian, but he was not an Austrian economist. Joseph Schumpeter. He was actually more, what today would be called Chicago type economist. And he wrote a very, very useful reference book and source book called The History of Economic Analysis. It's 1,000+ pages and so on. Never really finished it. His wife got together a lot of notes and did finally publish it. But here he talks, in his book he talks about how the name liberal was hijacked, he said, ironically enough, by the enemies of the system of free enterprise to be used for their point of view. I don't think I'll have time to get into how that happened. John Stuart Mill played a crucial role in that. And if you think that John Stuart Mill was one of the really great liberals, or maybe the great liberal of 19th century Britain, that's mistaken. He was the source of a lot of deviations from the liberal point of view. Now, the roots of liberalism go back very deeply into the history of the West. You can find them in ancient Greece. There's a play. If you've never read any Greek tragedy, read Antigone by Sophocles. And there, what happens is that the brother of Antigone starts an insurrection against the king of the city, and slain. And the king, Creon, refuses to give him proper burial, leaves him outside of the city walls to be eaten by the rats and the dogs, and Antigone can't stand that. She goes out and buries her brother. Well, Creon, for him this is insubordination, and he calls her into the throne room, and she says that she has to obey the laws of God and not the laws of man. There is a higher law written in the stars before the world began, and it's in pursuance of that higher law that she did what was proper and disobeyed the king. Well, you can see there's already the idea of the higher law that supersedes the government's law. A man that you've probably heard of, but who repays a lot of reading. Liberty Press. I don't know if you know about Liberty Press in Indianapolis. It's part of the Liberty Fund, and they put out excellent editions of books. And there's something in their charter that they have to lose money on all the books that they publish. So they're terrific production values. And there's a 3-volume set of the essays of Acton. Acton never wrote a book. He thought that he wasn't prepared to write his history of liberty. He didn't have enough information. He read two large volumes every day of his life, of his adult life, in 5 or 6 languages, but still he was not sufficiently prepared. Now, Acton, you all know a famous saying of his, right? Power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. But as I say, his essays are really worth looking into. And in one of he has an essay in the history of liberty in antiquity and the history of liberty in Christianity, a set of papers. And here he says that he was a Catholic. Here he says that the foundation of liberty was set already in the Gospels, where the Pharisees try to trick Jesus. It's like the Roadrunner or something. I mean, they never succeed in tricking him. He always has the last word. And they say, should we pay taxes? And it says, show me a coin. And he says, whose picture is on this? Caesar. Render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, but render unto God what is God's. And Acton says that that division was set up between what is Caesar's, what is the state's, and what is God's, that goes through the whole history of Christianity and is, in Acton's view, the foundation of liberty in the West. And this is something that I'm going to be talking about and emphasizing, that liberty comes about, and doesn't mean it's only in the West. No. Well, I mean, there are traces of it in China, Lao Tzu's philosophy, among early Muslim writers. But fundamentally, liberalism grew up in the West, in the Europe that was, or at one time had been, in communion with the Bishop of Rome. In other words, Western Christendom. Okay, and the division of power between church and state was crucial for all of this. In other great civilizations, the state controlled the church. Occasionally, the church, the religion, controlled the state, but mainly the state controlled the church. And in ancient Egypt, the pharaoh was himself a god. The emperor of China was considered a god. The emperor of Japan was a direct descendant of the goddess of the sun. And similarly, in other great civilizations, there was not this, not only division, but antagonism between religion and the state that we find in Christendom. Here's a statement from an early church father, St. Ambrose, the Bishop of Milan. He was the one who converted St. Augustine to Christianity. Augustine had been a kind of pagan. What happened was that the emperor, at that time in Constantinople, Theodosius, ordered Ambrose to hand over the cathedral church of Milan to the emperor for his own purposes. And Ambrose's response was, "At length came the command, deliver up the basilica. But I reply, it is not lawful for us to deliver it up, nor for your majesty to receive it. By no law can you violate the house of a private man. And do you think that the house of God may be taken away? It is asserted that all things are lawful to the emperor." That was the philosophy of law that the Roman Empire ended up with. It is asserted that all things are his. This is something that will come up again and again in the history of church-state relations. Louis XIV, for instance, the absolutist ruler of France, claimed that by right, all property in France belonged to the king. He could allow private people to use their farms, their mines, their factories, or whatever, but he was the owner in the long run. But Ambrose says and this is him talking to the emperor, "But do not burden your conscience with the thought that you have any right as emperor over sacred things. Exalt not yourself. It is written, gods to gods," that is what Jesus has said, "and Caesars to Caesar. The palace is the emperor's," your palace over there in Constantinople. "The churches are the bishops. To you is committed jurisdiction over public, not over sacred buildings." So this is something that distinguishes European civilization from the other great civilizations that create very great works of art and so on. But here we have an international church, the Catholic Church, that sets itself up against the pretensions of the state power. And that'll come up throughout the Middle Ages, which is the Middle Ages are not the Dark Ages as people, I suppose, still think. These historical myths, like with the Industrial Revolution, for instance, outlast historical research for generations. I'll be mentioning how it's the Middle Ages are the nursery of Western liberty. Now, when the Germans came on the scene, that is the different Germanic tribes. You know, one Germanic tribe, the Franks, gave their name to France. Another, the Angles, gave their name to England. The Lombards, and the Burgundians to another great province. Well, the Germans came over, and what they brought eventually, as it developed, was Western feudalism. Now, this is different from the feudalism that you can find, for instance, in Russia, where the different noblemen were appointees of the state. Here, the noblemen had rights in their own right. The relationship to the king was one of a contract. The king had certain responsibilities to his vassals, and they had certain responsibilities to him. So it was a mutual contract. And this is important eventually in the history of the rise of liberty. But the main factor in the rise of Western liberty was the division of Europe into a multiplicity of separate and conflicting polities. This is the foundation idea of a school of scholars that I mentioned the other day that you can call the European Miracle Group. That's a book by the Australian economic historian E.L. Jones, but you can find the same thing in numerous works. A very accessible work is How the West Grew Rich by Nathan Rosenberg. I imagine everybody knows how to spell Rosenberg. And Ellie Birdsall. How the West Grew Rich. This is why eventually we come up with liberalism. Liberalism is something that develops, that incubates and then develops over a long period of time. It didn't suddenly come on the scene. And the most important factor is that Europe was divided politically. One of the writers for this school, Jean Bechler, of I think some institute in Paris, said that the formative great event in European history was a non-event. That is, after the fall of the Roman Empire in the West, no other empire was able to exert the hegemony over Central and Western Europe. Some German emperors tried to, but because of the division of Europe into so many different polities, they were turned back. Frederick Barbarossa, for instance, who tried to take over the city-states of northern Italy. You can go to Lake Como, and there's a tower there, this beautiful Italian lake in the north, where Barbarossa had made his headquarters on the conquest of Italy. But the city-states of the time, led by Venice and Lombardy and others, fought him. Sometimes liberalism required actual physical force, armed force, and they defeated the Germans. So Europe remained, although there were attempts over the centuries to exert a universal empire, Napoleon, for instance, or before him, Louis XIV, they were always defeated. And what gradually emerged from this multiplicity of different polities, and also from the division within each polity, whether it was a principality or a small kingdom or whatever, was further division. As time went on, parliaments arose. Not just the most famous, we know about the English Parliament, but almost all of Western Europe and Central Europe also had diets, as they're sometimes called. In France, the Estates General. And these were representatives of the different classes that were brought together to okay new taxes. The medieval view was taxation was an extraordinary thing. It had to somehow gain the acceptance of the people who were being taxed. That was the original purpose of bringing the representatives of the commons and the representatives of the lords together in the English Parliament. The oldest parliament actually was in Spain, in Castile, the Cortes. Also, the people, led by very often by these barons, these vassals that, as I mentioned to you, would not totally subject to the king, but had their own rights and privileges under Western feudalism. They rose up and forced the king to issue decrees acknowledging the rights of the people. Now, there's something called a Magna Carta. You can go to your school library, and you don't have to read the Latin. English translations are often included. And it's pretty short. It's about 40 pages or so. And these are the different points that were exacted by the barons of England from bad King John the First, but there'll never be another. There was never another John, King of England, because he had such a bad reputation. They forced him to recognize. Now, this is under feudalism in 1215, so it's a bit archaic in language. No scutage nor any aid shall be imposed on our kingdom, unless by common counsel of our kingdom, except for ransoming the king's son and a few other things. And for these there shall not be levied more than a reasonable aid, and likewise concerning aids from the city of London. Already London was the largest town in Europe, and there King John acted. The school of European miracle keeps emphasizing this. They're not libertarians, but they are people who recognize what actually happened in history. And the fundamental point is that the state always acts as a predator. Okay? The people who are in control of the states, people who are in control of the police and of the swords or guns, and in charge of the army, they try to exact as much as possible from the population. Now, if they're sensible, they don't try to overdo it, because then the state parasite is going to lose its host. But they try to go to the limit. Sometimes that's what the state does and destroys its own society. But they try to go to the limit. So that this is the main point that occurs in the Middle Ages, limiting the rights or the authority of the state, the head of state, whatever he might be, to exact taxes from the people. So there, in the Magna Carta, there's no new taxes except with the consent of the council. Council in those days meant mainly the barons themselves. No constable or other bailiff of ours. This is what King John had to swear to. Shall take corn or other provisions from anyone without immediately tendering money therefor, unless he can have postponement thereof by permission of the seller. So the king simply can't send his soldiers out to confiscate, for instance, the harvest, as happened often in other places. He had to buy it from the seller. No sheriff or bailiff of ours or other person shall take the horses or carts of any freeman, not just a baron, but any freeman, for transport duty against the will of the said freeman. Okay? Here are these having to do with property. Here's a well-known right that the king had to swear to. It shall be lawful in future for anyone to leave our kingdom and to return safe and secure by land and water, except for a short period in time of war on grounds of public policy. That is, freedom of merchants to go back and forth to other countries. No freeman shall be taken or imprisoned or exiled or in any way destroyed, except by the lawful judgment of his peers and the law of the land. Okay? So the rule of law and trial by jury. And then finally, King John didn't like this at all. Finally, let's see now, the last. Yes. Wherefore it is our will, and we firmly enjoin, that the English Church be free, the men of our kingdom have and hold all the aforesaid liberties, rights, and concessions for themselves and their heirs, of us and our heirs, that is all the future kings of England would have to swear to this also, in all respects, in all places aforesaid. And then to guarantee this, there was a list of the great lords and barons of England. And the first name was Stephen Langton, the Archbishop of Canterbury. Okay? Now, this doesn't mean that the British rulers always respected this, of course not. But it was always there, the Magna Carta was always there, and it could be referred to and leaned on by people who wanted to assert the rights of Englishmen. This is what Edmund Burke emphasized. That is, he didn't believe in the universal rights of mankind, but the rights of Englishmen. Going back to the Magna Carta, and as a matter of fact, the Magna Carta suggests that these rights predated the granting of this. It ends, given under our hand, that is King John, the above named and many others being witnesses, in the meadow which is called, pardon me, Runnymede, between Windsor and Staines, the 15th day of June, in the 17th year of our reign, in the year 1215 of our Lord. So, this is an example. There were very similar kinds of statements that the rulers had to swear to in the Netherlands, which had been under the control of the Dukes of Burgundy. They had to swear to something called the joyeuse entrée. And what it said was very similar to this, that the rights of the citizens shall not be I swear, upon becoming the Duke of Burgundy, or afterwards, when the Spanish Habsburgs took over, becoming the ruler in that way, I swear that I will uphold the traditional customs of the people, and particularly that no new taxes shall be imposed without the consent of the diets. And all of what's today Belgium and the Netherlands were divided up into smaller areas, counties, and each of them had a special diet, that is a special little parliament that represented the property owners. So this is something else that we get from the time of the Middle Ages. And something that should be mentioned is the Doctrine of Natural Law. Okay, not exactly natural rights, which is a derivative and comes a little later, but natural law. Thomas Aquinas is a very good example of that. Every ethical obligation of man derives from the law of nature. And part of this is the political realm. The prince, meaning generically any ruler, is himself under the natural law, does not stand above the natural law. And his duty is not to promote himself or to expand his power, but to promote the welfare of his people. This idea of natural law was taught in every European university, from Salamanca to Oxford to the Jagiellonian University of Krakow, and remained a part of the European heritage, even though in modern times, that is from the 15th century on, and especially in the 16th century, we have the rise of royal absolutism. Machiavelli is a good example of that. If you maybe looked at The Prince, read his little book, The Prince, and here that's an expression of the idea of the modern state. It's also an expression of the Renaissance. People who think that the Renaissance was a great step forward for liberalism or for liberty, well, I mean, maybe in some artistic ways, and having to do with individual creativity, but certainly not in politics. In those days, it's funny how people think of what the wave of the future is and who really is on the cutting edge. It was absolutism that was on the cutting edge. Just as in the 1930s, it was fascism. And countries that, or communism for that matter, countries that remained democratic were considered old-fashioned, creaky sort of devices. And fascism was definitely the wave of the future. And at this time, it was the modern state, the modern absolutist state with its ruler at the head and coming from him, developing little by little the different bureaucracies, military bureaucracies, civilian bureaucracies, now supported by taxation, not by any kind of, without any kind of check from these various parliaments. And one by one, these diets or parliaments on the continent of Europe went, disappeared, vanished. In Spain, they actually came to a fight. Again, the representatives of the cities who wanted to maintain their privileges of not being taxed without their own consent were fought and defeated by the armies of Charles V. So this absolutism seemed to be sweeping everything before it. But remember, Europe is divided into different polities. So no one was in a position to do what the Emperor of China might do, and that is impose his absolutist will on all of Europe. And the first big break came in the Netherlands, the revolt of the Dutch against the Spanish Habsburgs. How many people have heard about this before? Okay. I don't want to make any invidious comparisons, but this is really a crucial landmark, not only in the history of Europe or the history of liberalism, but in the history of Western civilization. And for some reason, young people are not taught this very often. The Spanish Habsburgs, especially Philip II, the second half of the 16th century, wanted to subdue the Netherlands. Wanted to, first of all, impose taxes at will, because they were the richest, they had a vast empire, but the Netherlands, Holland and Belgium were the richest part of his, already the richest part of his empire. So he wanted to raise taxes at will. And then when the Reformation came, he wanted to suppress the Dutch Calvinists and introduced the Inquisition into the Netherlands. Well, the Dutch resisted. And already they were, well, maybe with one or two of the Italian city-states, the richest part of Europe. Because, as I mentioned before, they had very strict rules respecting private property. These diets, these little parliaments that they had, were controlled by the merchants. So that there were very definite property rights. And this led to tremendous economic development even before they became independent. You know, if you maybe think of it, what happens to the wealth of a rich man in Eastern countries? You know, there were all these stories like Aladdin's lamp and Alibaba and so on. So what do the rich men do? They put their wealth in a cave somewhere or underground. Why do they do that? To hide it from the king. Because if the ruler found out how wealthy they were, he would just make up some pretext for executing them and confiscating their fortune. Now, in Western Europe, this really couldn't be done very often, and certainly it could not be done in the Netherlands, where, as I say, the laws were made by merchants. So that this allowed wealthy men to use their wealth productively. already, as I say, even before the revolt of the Dutch in the 1570s, they would send out large, huge, really for the time, fishing boats into the North Sea. They really were in control, and also into the Baltic. They were in control of the herring trade, and these ships holding the herring, gutted it. They had facilities for that. Smoked it or put it on ice and so on. Now, what does it take in the way of capital formation to create a fleet like that? A lot. But merchants were perfectly happy and content and unworried about showing their wealth in this way, because their property was protected by law, was inviolate. Okay? This is really the history of the growth of civilization. Amsterdam became the great trading center of Europe, and one of Amsterdam's great sons was a Jewish philosopher, Spinoza. When the Spanish Habsburgs stupidly threw out the Jews, and then it happened in Portugal also, many of them left, or some left for the other Mediterranean countries, but many of them went to Holland. And that Jewish community was was a crucial part of the development of Holland and its great prosperity, and existed until the time of Anne Frank. And this is what Spinoza wrote. He was very proud of his city. The city of Amsterdam reaps the fruit of freedom in its own great prosperity and the admiration of all other people. For in this most flourishing state and most splendid city, men of every nation and religion live together in the greatest harmony and ask no questions before trusting their goods to a fellow citizen. A citizen's religion or sect is not considered of any importance. It has no effect before the judges. And the only thing they're worried about, as Voltaire afterwards said, is whether their debtors could pay their debts. Why should this be? Why should religious toleration go along with their economic policy and protection of property? Well, on the same principle that the manager of the supermarket you go to doesn't interrogate you as to your religion. Doesn't stop you at the door and say, well, what are your religious views? On the same principle that he doesn't stop people of a different color from him. Because there's only one thing he's interested in, or there's only one thing any merchant is interested in, which is what? Huh? Making money, right. And this was the case with this mercantile republic. By the way, when the Dutch became independent, they didn't set up a king, they didn't set up a court. Okay, they depended on these little provincial diets, and that was the one thing on their mind: making money. So, although the Catholics were a minority of about a third, still, the Calvinist ministers made laws against them, but they were not applied. De facto, they were tolerated, as, for instance, also the Jews were tolerated. So, now we have this Dutch Republic flourishing. Everybody in Europe who paid attention saw that it was a great success. There were poor people in Holland, but they were taken care of by charity, and they didn't compare with the poor in Spain or Naples or Poland or Germany, for that matter. This was a flourishing community, and people started to notice. This is something that goes along with the division of Europe into different political groups. That is the demonstration effect, right? Something can be tried in one part, for instance, Holland, succeed, and this exerts a demonstration effect, an attraction on the rest of Europe. Now, liberal ideas, I'll talk about the most important place that where the Dutch example encouraged liberalism, and that was England. But liberal ideas from the Middle Ages had continued and in fact been developed. In particular, at the University of Salamanca in Spain and other places in Spain, where monks, the Dominican order particularly, developed natural law theory. Now, you have to admit, you waste a lot of money, don't you? How many people here think that they waste a lot of money? Yeah, and you waste a lot of money. You couldn't invest your money better than by buying the 2-volume History of Economic Thought by Murray Rothbard. Because it's not just a history of economic thought, it's a history of everything I'm talking about. And in particular, there's a whole big chapter on the School of Salamanca. It wasn't just the University of Salamanca, but that was the most celebrated part. From the School of Salamanca, they developed, as Murray points out, the bases of economic theory in the way that eventually led to the Austrian school. For instance, unlike the British school of Adam Smith, Ricardo, and so on, they didn't they didn't hold at all by the labor theory of value. What they held by was value as a subjective utility to the individual. Now, people talk about a just price doctrine that the church forced people to obey. There are ways around that. And they started to talk about different exceptions to this just price. And the final outcome, as Murray points out, is that the just price was essentially the market price. Now, this School of Salamanca is then taken up in time by certain Italians and especially by certain Frenchmen going into the 19th century, and then the Austrians, and you have a much more believable and sensible view of value than the British developed. By the way, this is sort of implied in what I've said so far. People think that the history of liberalism is the history of Britain and America. All of the European peoples, in one way or another, contributed to the rise of liberalism. And in some cases, very importantly contributed. There's no reason to emphasize the French, obviously, but also the Italians, the Spaniards, okay, various Germans, believe it or not, and other of the European people. Now, the scene moves to England, and there also you have an attempt by the rulers to impose absolutism. This is not the Habsburgs anymore. By the way, the Spanish Habsburgs, the Austrian Habsburgs were great guys. The claimant, or the, let's say, the legitimate heir to the throne of Austria-Hungary is a very good friend of the Institute. The house in the royal house in England was the House of Stuart. They'd come down from Scotland and brought their own anti-liberal, anti-democratic ideas with them. They picked the wrong people to try to bulldoze. And for the 17th century, you have a series of constitutional crises in England. And one of the Stuarts, Charles I, tried to impose taxes, ship money in particular, that is money to support the fleet, on his own say-so in places where it had never been raised before. until the time came, as one leader of the opposition said, that there is nothing a man can call his own. If he can take ship money, even if it's a small amount, but he just arbitrarily takes it without any appeal, without any authority, then he can take anything he wants. So the Great English Civil War occurred. And like a lot of wars, it didn't help things very much. But Charles I lost his head. I mean, literally lost his head. They actually executed a king of England, which is an amazingly radical thing to do. Now, in this period, until there's the restoration of the Stuarts in 1660, from 1649 to 1660, there was a tremendous amount of important political thought that occurred. You can imagine what happened. I mean, for the first time in many, many centuries, the English were without a king. So people were wondering, what is the basis of legitimate authority? And different theories came up. This is the time of Thomas Hobbes. You know, you probably have heard of him. But Hobbes was a supporter of absolutism. The best people at this time are the group called the Levelers. And Murray has a great chapter on the Levelers. I write it with two L's in the honor of the British, of the English. And the Levelers now began to say, well, we got rid of the king, but now Parliament wants to do the same sort of things. They, for instance, want to censor books. That's one thing that we had against Charles I. He set up this board that would monitor the Stationers' Guild, that is, people who had printing presses, and decide what could not be printed. And now Parliament wants to do the same thing. They want to impose taxes. They want to set up a state church. Instead of the Church of England, they want to set up the Presbyterians as the religion enforced by the state. So we're not going to have anything of that. And even in the short period that the Levelers were around, their philosophy developed, that is, evolved, until finally one of the leading Levelers said, even the Magna Carta is but a meager thing. See, they're going beyond the documented, chartered rights of Englishmen now to the universal rights of man. The Levelers were put down, and the Stuarts came back, but they were up to their old tricks. And James II tried now to rule simply on his own say-so. I'm not sure he said that he had the right to make signing statements for any act of Parliament, saying that he would obey what he thought was he liked in the act and disobey the rest. But it was something like that. So that in a sense, if you want to look at it that way, you know, the present administration has a distinguished pedigree, also going back to James II. But an opposition arose. Okay, and there was a physician who became a philosopher and a writer, who spent some time, who was clearly against the Stuarts. So he went into exile, spent some time in Holland, and a number of years in Holland, looked around. His name was John Locke, okay? And came back and published his works on civil government. Now, when Jefferson came to write the Declaration of Independence, he said he didn't consult any books. Well, he didn't have to. Didn't have to consult Locke. He knew Locke backwards and forwards. As it percolated down, well, he read Locke himself, but the ideas of Locke percolated down through various writers, journalists, others, to the general population of the colonies. So that this was a very common view that Man is not made for government, but government for man. And in particular, as Locke says, the whole purpose of government is to guarantee, to better safeguard the natural God-given rights of individuals. People get together and form a government because there are certain disadvantages to being in a state of nature, although there still is a law of nature to govern it, but still there are disadvantages. I mean, if somebody wants to attack you or take your property, you're just defending yourself instead of getting together with others to defend the whole principle. And also people can have different interpretations of the law of nature, and they can get into fights about that. So it's better then to set up a government. But the government is bound by this compact to defend only the rights of individuals. Although the individuals have to give up certain minor rights, but this is the purpose of government. And if the government breaks that contract, then the people have the right to rise up against the government, form a different government. Does this sound familiar at all to you? This ideology became for a long time, the philosophy of the English-speaking people. But, as I say, Locke doesn't stand by himself. He's very dependent, for instance, on a Dutch philosopher named Grotius. And others. Well, okay. In the 18th century, that liberalism became a full-fledged philosophy. In the 19th century, it begins to spread and develop in certain ways, but the 18th century is, you could say, the intellectual high point. Everybody's heard of Adam Smith, who was part of the Scottish Enlightenment. Okay. France, of course, had an Enlightenment, but Smith in Scotland, his idea of the invisible hand. A person is led by an invisible hand to promote an end which is no part of his intention. By pursuing his own interest, he frequently promotes that of society more effectually than when he really intends to promote it. Interesting, sounds like a paradox. No human wisdom or knowledge could ever be sufficient to the duty of superintending the industry of private people and directing it towards the employments most suitable to the interests of society. So what are we left with? What Smith called this the simple system of natural liberty. Less known than Smith is a man that Murray considered a much greater economist, the Frenchman Turgot. Our true policy consists in following the course of nature without pretending to direct its course. Because in order to direct it without deranging it and without injuring ourselves, it would be necessary for us to be able to follow all the changes in the needs, the interests, and the industry of mankind. Here's Hayek's knowledge problem of knowledge under socialism. It would be necessary to know these things in such detail as would be physically impossible to arrive at. Even if we had that mass of knowledge, which it is impossible to gather, the result would only be to let things go precisely as they would have gone by themselves, by the system, the simple action of men's interests, influenced by the balance of a free competition. That was in about 1760 or so. So you probably can see the connection between that and Hayek's view and the problem of economic calculation into socialism. Turgot was a finance minister under Louis XVI, who also ended badly, and pressed on him various reforms. He had Louis XVI was a very weak king. I mean, the Bourbons had produced some powerful kings, but Louis XVI was very. Louis XVI used to, you know how people drink until they're drunk. He used to eat until he passed out. Also, he would, his wife, Marie Antoinette, just could twirl him around her finger. So he issued various important reforms, abolishing the guild system, toleration for Protestants, introducing free trade for grain, at least within France. But abolishing most of the pensions at Versailles. But what you could call the rent-seeking constituencies were too powerful. He rescinded them. That was the last hope of reform for the French monarchy. A couple of decades later, Louis XVI would find out that he had made a very bad mistake. Well, a lot more could be said. Now I'm going to, for some reason, they have me competing with other professors. I mean, it's going to be a slaughter in these concurrent sessions. Okay. Now tomorrow I'm giving a talk here, as a matter of fact. I don't mean to. I hope I don't embarrass my fellow instructors here. On the liberals on the all-important question of war and peace, and maybe I'll also bring up a few points that I didn't get to today. Well, Mark, we have a few minutes, couple of minutes. Any comments, questions? Yeah.
Can you recommend any resources on the revolt of the Dutch against the Spanish Habsburgs?
There's a large literature. An American diplomat wrote in the 19th century. Motley wrote a famous book on the revolt of the Dutch. I don't know if it's in 2 volumes. If you look up some good book on modern history on Western Civ, they should have some chapters on that. Yeah.
What would you say is Acton's greatest contribution to liberalism?
Well, he was a very deep historian. I don't agree with everything that Acton supported, but I mean, for one thing, a lot of people who quote Acton and praise Acton don't realize that he supported the Southern cause in the so-called Civil War. Walter Block used to try to ruin my reputation, and because I use the term Civil War. Said it has to be the war between the states, or really better, the war against northern aggression. Yeah, you want to take strategic advice from Walter Block, right? But now, it's not because Acton supported. Acton wrote to Jefferson Davis, to Robert E. Lee after the war, and said that my heart broke at Appomattox, and I grieved more for the loss at Richmond than I rejoiced over the gain at Waterloo. Very heavy thing to say for a British liberal. Why? Not because he was in favor of slavery, because he said that the only curb to consolidated government was states' rights. And the only real guarantee of states' rights was secession. Was not, by the way, it was not a civil war. The South wasn't trying to take over the whole country or take over the central government. They did the same thing that the American colonists did in 1776 when we seceded from an empire. That I think says a lot about Acton. One more question? Thank you, Master. Yes.
You mentioned the Renaissance wasn't like a step forward for liberty, and then it snapped through this. Other than Machiavelli, who you think?
Well, there was a French writer, Jean Baudin, okay, who also supported absolutism. It was mainly, though, in the practice of the rulers that that's what I had in mind. They now began to act, as Machiavelli told them, with no limit, as Machiavelli taught. I don't know if he had to teach them, it's their natural penchant. As if there were no limits to what they could do. They would decide what was in the public interest. And also, Machiavelli introduced reason of state. Naturally, we want to be a little sophisticated about it, and we use the French raison d'etat. Reason of state means that the rulers are not bound by the same rules that bind you and me. If they have to do something, if they have to lie, if they have to cheat, if they have to go to war, if they have to connive, if they have to kill enemies, they can always claim reason of state. They're not doing it in their capacity as an individual. They're doing it in their capacity as a sovereign ruler who has the right to do those sort of things. Okay, well, thank you very much.